All right. Well, welcome everybody. I'm so excited to be here with y'all. My name is Sabira Lakhani. I'm a Senior Director of Product at Rheaply, and I'm also a podcast host on Selling Circular. And I am very excited to be hosting and moderating this webinar called Unlocking Circularity, which we're going to be talking about developing the framework for identifying and scaling product reuse programs. What a joy. We're really making change, big change here today. And so I'm very, very excited to kick this off. Just before we get started, I'm going to talk a little bit about the quote unquote rules of the road today. So here are some notes. You can submit questions to the host using a Q&A feature via Zoom. And then also we're going to do some polls through the Zoom chat. So please participate, add your voice. We're really excited to hear from you. And we will have attendees be muted throughout the session just for comfort of everybody's ears. And we can respectfully listen to Valentina and Jaden. And now I'm thrilled to introduce our panelists and presenters. Valentina, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Valentina. I'm a Senior Sustainability Manager at Rheaply, and my role is focused on leading circularity projects with our customers. I work with organizations to identify the most impactful opportunities for implementing circularity initiatives across their business, help them focus on long-term programs for reuse, product take-back, recycling, a variety of areas that fall within the circular economy. And throughout all of this, really aligning with our customers' larger sustainability goals and new business interests. In addition to that, I do some events like these, educational activities with our customers as well as the general public to discuss the circular economy and related sustainability topics. And I'll pass it to you, Jaden.
Amazing. I'm Jaden. I work at Legrand. I'm a senior sustainability analyst. Legrand is a manufacturing company, so I'm working with engineers on reducing embodied carbon when we're designing products. And I'm also working on circular economy business models like this project with Rheaply and Valentina.
Awesome. Thanks, Jaden and Valentina, both. Excited to have you here today. So what we're going to be doing over the next hour is covering the following four topics. One, we're going to talk about what does circular economy mean in general and to Rheaply and Legrand. Then we're going to dive deep into this case study, AV product reuse case study, AV sneak peek audio visual. That's what that stands for. And then we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the lessons learned from the reuse case study, and we'll open it up for questions. So pretty straightforward. I'm going to kick it off with what is the circular economy? This is a very exciting and thrilling topic for me. I've spent most of my career in this, but circular economy is a system where materials never become waste and we regenerate nature. And it's in contrast with this historical economic model that we've had and experienced globally, which generally has been very wasteful. So we go from extracting resources, turning them into products, selling them, consuming them, and disposing them, and they end up in the landfills, in nature, and as a negative externality of business. And circular economy offers a bending of this linear economy. We have to bend our minds, we have to bend our businesses, and then we can achieve some sort of new age economy where we design out waste and we can lean on tools and processes like design, different types of production, reuse and repair, remanufacturing, better recycling. And all of this helps us tackle climate change and even other global challenges like biodiversity loss, waste, pollution. And we're really trying to decouple economic activity from consumption of finite resources. So to quickly summarize, the circular economy is based on three principles that are really driven by design. So we want to eliminate waste and pollution. We want to circulate products and material at their highest value and as much as possible. We want to regenerate nature. And all of this, as I said, is a really great in theory, but we really have to take action in order to bring this to life. unfortunately, sadly, is not going to magically happen. And that's what's really wonderful about today's webinar, is that you'll get a sneak peek into what Legrand did alongside Rheaply to bring these concepts to life in their business. All right, so Valentina, why don't you tell us a little bit about how Rheaply thinks about circular economy, because every company kind of has a different perspective and approach to it.
Yeah, for sure. So Rheaply was started with the interest in building technology that would support the circular economy and facilitate the extended use of materials. We have the technology that is, the basis of our business, and then we also have experts across our business that have backgrounds in circularity. But we're really on a mission to build a community that facilitates the extended use of products and materials. Our technology, as well as our in-house experts, are really coming together to connect organizations that have excess or idle products or materials from one organization to another organization that is in search of items. So whether you're an organization that has purchased goods and services to operate your business, or maybe you're a product manufacturer that wants to take more responsibility for your sold products after their first use, that's typically when we'll come into play and work with organizations to find opportunities to extend the life of your items. And we do this with a variety of products. Today we'll talk about audiovisual, which is very exciting. But we also have a lot of furniture, fixtures, equipment on our platform. You also see lab equipment and building materials on our platform, and a focus in the consulting work that we do. So excited to share more throughout this presentation, but that's a quick high level.
Awesome. Thanks, Valentina. Now, Jaden, can you tell us a little bit about Legrand, and then also share how Legrand has been bringing circular economy to life?
Yeah. So Legrand is actually a French-owned company that's been around for over a century. So it has a long-standing history, and it also is a little bit more influenced by European environmental standards, which is really cool. For the North American division, which is the side that I work on, we have 32 brands across 5 market segments. So it is a pretty expansive product lineup. We do things in lighting, we do electrical wiring systems like light switches and outlets, we do data power and control, so like data centers, building control systems, and then audio visual as well. We published our 5th roadmap in 2022. Our next one is coming out next year. And one of the 4 tenets of this roadmap is actually circular economy. So it's always been a focus for Legrand, but in the recent, we've been really trying to focus on both sides of what we think circular economy stands for. Designing out waste when we're actually designing the products, reducing the embodied carbon in the products, and then more projects like this, which is thinking about business models that can be implemented, especially business models that can be implemented across products we've already designed. Since we already have such a large product catalog, we don't want to ignore that. We want to focus on new products, but also try to include the products that already exist.
I love that. I'm fangirling. Y'all are such a role model by thinking about both sides of that equation, and that's really great. So if we move on to the next slide, this is the high-level context about the case study that we're going to dive into. So Rheaply and Legrand came together, and they were really asking this question about how manufacturers like Legrand can identify potential product reuse programs across this very large and diverse product catalog, which Jaden talked to you about. And also, if there's a possibility for these programs to be designed in a way that can tap into local reuse markets rather than shipping products across a country or region, right? Trying to keep things local, keep the carbon impact as low as possible. And so Legrand was interested in answering this question, and then also trying to think about how to expand their existing circular economy program. So there was already kind of a foundation, and you're building upon it, which was really great. So Jaden, why don't you tell us a little bit about how this project scope has been different than the typical requests that you've received either from customers or from Legrand internally?
Yeah, definitely. A lot of our existing circular economy models are pretty specific to certain products. They don't really come from like a top-down approach that somebody finds a product that they think is already being asked by customers for circular approaches. Maybe they're asking if there's any upgradability, if there's any modularity, and we sort of build around customer interest already. We wanted to take sort of a step back and look at our existing product catalog and see what we were missing. And we chose audiovisual for a couple of reasons. We had readily available data, which is always helpful, but also audiovisual tends to have a pretty high turnover rate with our customers. I think that's mostly because of technology advancing pretty quickly, and also sort of the environment around webinars and different conferencing, web conferencing, that has sort of changed in the last 5 years or so. So everybody wants the latest and greatest cameras, the latest and greatest microphones, all the different things that go into audiovisual when they're creating their office setups. So I think that is a good opportunity for circular reuse. We also needed to focus a little bit because even within audiovisual, there's 70 different product categories, and that's not product categories. It represents probably about 1,000 products itself. So we just needed to focus so that, the data set would be a little bit smaller. But our objective was to analyze the resale potential of just the AB products, prioritize those products in order to narrow our scope when we're trying to flesh out business models. And then after we test our methodology that we've developed, and we'll explain in this presentation, we're hoping to scale it to our other divisions and our other product lines. So we sort of went through 3 phases. The phase 1 was looking at our sales data, and also to collect and create other reuse criteria that we thought were interesting per product. Phase 2, we were designing a methodology to take all of that data that we had created and also collected from internally, and then prioritize and rank our products based on what we thought was most interesting. And then phase 3, identify these top product categories and then flesh them out into true business models.
You've been dropping some hints already, but what kind of products fall under audiovisual equipment? I mean, I know I want the latest and greatest to be still clear for y'all, but tell us more.
Yeah, it's pretty broad. It's both behind the scenes stuff and stuff that you would see and use on a daily basis when you're in a typical office setup. The things that are behind the scenes are more like equipment racks. That's the networking items that are needed in order to run and process a bunch of data in an office. And then the more in the conference spaces, there's cameras, there's cables that need to connect things, the powered tables that you plug into, TV mounts. It sort of runs the whole gamut in terms of what's needed to run web conferencing spaces.
Got it. Cool. Okay. So now that we understand the scope of the project, which you told us a little bit about, and what type of products we were looking at, let's dive into the actual process that y'all went through. Valentina, do you want to get us started?
Yeah, sure. So we're calling this our recipe for product prioritization. There's 3 key ingredients that we're using in this recipe. And we started off, Jaden spoke a little bit to this already. Data collection and analysis was one piece. We had data creation, and then we had a rating system. And the data collection is opportunities where the data already existed. That's a big piece as to why we wanted to focus on certain product lines over others. So tapping into data that already existed so we can just pull it and analyze it, filter it for information that's important for us. There were other data sets that just did not exist. They weren't on paper anywhere, and we needed to create the data. And that was pulling and looking into the minds of experts at Legrand, tapping into the market to understand their insights. And then we built that data set. And then with both of those data sets, we then applied a rating system. So we created a rating system, which we'll share all the details on later on. And we applied that to both of those 2 examples of data. And that spit out what we're calling a product prioritization, where you see the products that have the highest potential for reuse and resale to rise to the top of the prioritization. And we will then look to those as maybe the best opportunities for developing business cases for Legrand.
Cool. So I want y'all to imagine you're in Jaden and Valentina's shoes and get your dexterous fingers ready to answer our poll. If you were in their shoes, what factors would you think are important to consider about product reuse? And I think we're going to launch a poll so that you can do so in Zoom.
That you can think about a camera as an example. What types of features of the camera might be important to think about when we're thinking about what is interesting for product reuse.
And other tips as you're answering as well of like thinking about before the product is even used, while the product is being used, after a product is used. There's all different kind of things that impact a product. Different types of data and information that you want to collect about it that might impact if it has a high potential or low potential for reuse. So also keep those in mind.
Yeah, good
And I see
question.
some stuff in
How do
the
we
chat.
find the poll? If it's not popping up, let's just do answers straight in the chat, and we can take it from there. It was going to be a cool visual, but that's not working. We'll take your inputs. Modularity. Yep.
Yeah, Katie says modularity. That's definitely one to think about.
Yep, we have modular again, replaceable parts, back compatible, disassembly, removal.
Yeah, reinstallation is definitely a key piece of that.
Yep. What about like how many things are out there in the world?
Yeah, manageable
Right.
size is a really key one for, especially for transportation. Depends how far it's going, right? Hyperlocal, maybe you can accept larger size, but
Is there a need? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big part of like, does the market want used cameras? Do they want these used things, or are they not at all interested?
Yeah, updates to technology is definitely interesting, right? If you're reselling it and it's already out of date, maybe that's something that needs to be remanufactured.
Well, thanks y'all for participating. We did our own little word cloud. So yeah, Jaden, do you want to tell us a little bit? Some of the folks already gave us insight into these, but yeah, what else are important factors?
Yeah, I think for the types of products that we were looking at, some of them are electrified and some of them are not. Electrical components tend to get a little bit more wear and tear quickly just through normal use. I think example was battery, but there's also a processing chip, processing boards. Those can often go out of date pretty quickly or get slower over the time of use. And then another one I think that we looked at really strongly was human product interaction. Not only just like typical human product interaction, but there are definitely some products that get used incorrectly. I think an example that everyone's probably seen in schools and things like that is if you have like a projector board that people expect to be a whiteboard but is not, they'll often draw on it and make marks, right? So that's the type of thing that we're thinking about. Is it a product that might be prone to improper use as well as wear during proper use.
Yeah, and a piece that was shared from like the audience that we also were thinking about was just what the market is saying, and if even if something is in pretty good condition and it's not technologically obsolete necessarily, is there still enough of an interest in the market, and where in the market do we see that? Like geographically, where does that land? So it's cool to see that. Like, I mean, a lot of what the audience shared is on this slide, which shows that everyone's already at a great point to start thinking about this for your own products if you also sit at a product manufacturer.
Yeah, I like I mean, it's funny that you said the human product interaction, and then it's kind of also like tied to cosmetic versus functional damage, because like if you write with permanent marker on that kind of screen, can you actually use it again? Like, it's not something I would know, but probably would want to know. And then also there might be like perceived damage, but if it's not actually damage, there's something that you could fix about it, but like the end user may or may not know about that, but the manufacturer would.
Yeah, one comment though that was in the chat that I thought was really cool that we didn't think about was if the product could be used in a different way, if there was like a multiple different types of ways the product could be used for the next use. And that is something that's pretty interesting to think about and could be cool for considering in a future round of this. But this is, I mean, what we're showing here is really everything that we considered. So when we went through the exact same activity and brainstorm stuff, this is what we threw on paper. We did not end up going forward with all of these because there's a lot of criteria here. But in the next slide, we speak to the main items that we narrow down on. And there's here, we'll see 7 criteria. So at the top of the table, we have 7 prioritization criteria, and in the next row, you'll see the data sources that we tapped in for each of those data sets. So a lot of these overlapping with what you saw on the previous slide, but here we're looking at average unit price of an item. So we are interested in stuff that is maybe it has a very high sale value when it was originally sold. That's a good thing to consider. How much of it already exists we are focusing on the United States right now. So in the United States, how much used inventory is available. So that would be looking at both of those scenarios, looking at revenue data. So that's private data from Legrand that they already have that exists today. And then we also looked at public data sets, which was criteria falling within the population of cities where Legrand sold data. So we analyzed the revenue data, looked at regions where the most sales were happening for certain product categories, and then looked at the population of those regions. We are assuming that more heavily, densely populated cities will have a larger market to buy this used equipment. And so that for us, we found that was a factor that was important to consider. In addition, we were looking at, so in that case, we tapped into census data to get the population data, but then we also looked at sales data. And then for another public data piece was we'll backtrack real quick. Thank you. Another data piece was on technological obsolescence. This was looking at, we used a product warranty as a proxy for technological obsolescence. This is how fast something is becoming, no longer needed, no longer in use. It's not the hottest thing. Maybe this happens more with a product like cameras versus other products that can be more like a rack or something that it's really just hardware. But in that case, we tapped into a public data that's available through Legrand on their website. And then the last 3 we put under data creation. So this is wear and tear, installation and deinstallation, and market demand. All of those we spoke at earlier, there's some data sets that just did not exist. We didn't have it down on paper and we needed to create it. And we'll go into details of what that looked like. But for the 3 of those, we used a combination of qualitative data assessments that we developed and a survey that we launched to collect that data to understand how much products vary when it comes to wear and tear, installing, and then the interest from the market.
Wow, this is like very thorough and comprehensive. So then what steps did you take to dig into each one of these types of data exploration?
Yeah, so the amazing Jaden, this was not easy. The amazing Jaden went in and found a ton of data through the sales team regarding 10 different product brands. So the first step was just collecting that data, finding it, cleaning it, making sure it was at a level that was useful to us. This data includes stuff like the date that the product was sold, who it was sold to, where it was shipped to, the price per unit, the quantity. That gets at the 2 items that we mentioned, the 2 criteria at the start. So understanding the unit price as well as the quantity that's already sold in the United States. We went through a process of analyzing and filtering that data. We did a lot of cleaning and trimming. We also omitted certain product categories where there just wasn't enough sales over the 3-year period that we were looking at. And so we thought, okay, this is not as a high priority. There's not as much of this product out in the market. Let's clean out and remove some of those lower sale items. And then from there, we aligned where the products were sold to the populations that existed, and that's where we pulled in census data to understand where the most densely populated regions are.
Got it. And so then Jaden, you then spearheaded a lot of the qualitative data assessments and you were looking to generate that new data. Tell us a little bit more about that process.
Definitely. So we did this for both wear and tear and the installation de-installation, but I'll just talk about wear and tear as an example. But we came up with a list of assessment questions. So there's about 10 questions that we decided to ask for each product category. And a lot of this was about interaction, about use, and about assessing how we thought the quality would last at the stage where it would enter a second life. So something like a product that has buttons that are used quite a bit, it goes into something called like cyclic wear. And so when somebody is pressing on a button, there's so many cycles that are designed for. And it also means that it has something that eventually, with enough use, is more likely to fail. It's more likely to fail than something that has no buttons at all. That's not necessarily an end all be all. It's just one of the questions that we're using to assess whether or not we think it has like a strong second life. Another one is how often is the product moved from one location to another. A lot of ours are actually pretty like built in or static products. So if there is a product that is moved more frequently, it's probably going to need to be set up and taken down and set up and taken down. That also is a different type of wear where, you know, maybe there's improper installation. There's a lot more risk associated with it. And then also if we have articulating or moving parts, there's a few of our products that have motors in them. That can also just be another thing that is prone to misuse or damage, especially during installation and de-installation. And then during wear and tear, we scored each of the questions from a 0 to 1. We basically went from high risk, medium risk, low risk. So there was stages in between the 0 and 1. But if it scored a 1 on a question, that meant it did not have that risk. So the higher the score, the less wear and tear we thought would happen to this product.
So Valentina, can you cover the approach that Rheaply took to create the market demand data?
Yeah, so this was a similar approach to what Jaden shared when we were talking about scoring 0 to 1, but the process of collecting the data was a little different. So rather than developing a set of assessment questions and asking those questions to each of the product categories that we were looking at, we went out to the market and surveyed the market to understand who's interested in buying used AV equipment. Do you already buy used AV equipment? And if you do, what is your experience? What type of products do you buy right now that are used? If you don't today, then would you be interested in doing this in the future? And if you are interested, what products would you be most interested in buying used? So we spoke with organizations that ranged from businesses, nonprofits, universities, K through 12. We did a pretty broad reach across different organizations because it wasn't solely an interest of like, let's just figure out who wants to buy our used stuff. The opportunity to understand nonprofits receiving donations of used equipment or just buying used equipment at very, very low prices, that also is an interest to understand like the holistic opportunity for product reuse. And the responses we received were great. There's, 85% of the organizations came back and said that they're either neutral to really interested in buying used AV equipment. And when we try to understand, okay, well, how much would you actually pay for some of these items? Almost half of the responses share that they pay up to 50% of the price of a new product. So I think when you're translating that back to resale revenue for your business and trying to develop a business case for creating a larger scale program like this, it's exciting to hear that the market is supporting this and there actually would be a financial incentive for a business to go forward. And so we took the feedback that we received from the survey, we translated it to scores, and then we use that as another piece of data to consider in this whole prioritization process.
Very cool. So now we have all the ingredients for your recipe. How do we go from the input data to the rating system?
Yeah, so this was a fun part. So I think what you can see here is this is an example of our data. At the top of this table, the columns are the same as the 7 criteria that we touched on earlier. The price, the population, wear and tear. And then the rows are looking at examples of brand 1, product 1, and so on. So that's the different types of products that we assess during this process. Here we have them anonymized. And then the data, though, although it's example data, it really is exactly what the data look like for us. So for average unit price, you're seeing examples where it's like dollar values. You have other scenarios where the data is a quantity of items, other where it's a quantity of people. And then the technological obsolescence is number of years that is for the warranty period. And then the final 3 are really like, this is based off of our own range and scores from this system that we developed for our questionnaires and assessments for those 3 different criteria. So those really range from 1 to 10, 1 to 15. It depends on the number of questions we developed in there. But this is what like the input data looks like. We needed to then translate all of this data to actual value because we can't compare $60 against a million people. So we needed to make all of this kind of consistent. And we did that by developing a rating system that accounted for the variation from one criteria to another. And on the next slide, we go into kind of the details of what that rating system looked like. Again, the purpose was to create this uniform scoring system where we could pretty much sum up all of the scores for a given product and we'd get a total score, and that would actually make sense if you compared it across one product to another. And so to develop this rating system, we used the ranges of the data, and we looked at quartiles to understand how the distribution of the data across the 25th percentile, 50th, and 75th percentile. So we used the quartiles as the ranges, and if you were in range 1, with the 25th percentile, then you had a rating of 1. And if you were in rating 4, above the 75th percentile, you had the highest rating. So really the higher your score, if you had a 4, you were the best you could be, and a 1 was the lowest you could be. And that was applied to everything. So for wear and tear, if you really don't experience a lot of wear and tear, you're a product that doesn't experience a ton of wear and tear, you're probably going to fall into the 75th percentile for the wear and tear questionnaire data, and you're going to have a rating of 4. So this is the kind of methodology we developed to get all the data aligned. And then Jaden, I'd love for you to speak to like what that actually looked like and the output data and how we then use that rating system to prioritize.
Yeah, so this is what it looks like after you put it through a system like that. And then you can see on the end, we've created what we call a final score. And so it's ranked based on overall what we think is most interesting for circular economy business models. And what was interesting to us is that it didn't necessarily come out with what we expected. I expected market demand to really truly correlate with the highest options. But I've mimicked this in our output data as well. That was not always the case. Sometimes we had something that was a pretty low market demand, but it lasted a long time. It didn't have a lot of wear and tear. There's a lot of inventory available. So when we were talking about this matrix, we discussed quite a bit about whether or not we should be weighting different categories more heavily. Maybe market demand actually is more interesting than wear and tear. Maybe that is what we should be focusing on. And as we discussed that, we actually sort of went around in circles because we think it depends on what type of circular economy business model you're looking at. If it's a leasing business model, that's probably a little bit different to look at than a true like take back and resell. If you're remanufacturing, maybe you don't care about wear and tear at all because you're going to take care of anything that had some cosmetic damage or some of these other things. So we're proposing a little bit of a different thought process for using this matrix per different type of circular economy model that we're evaluating. In the next slide, I show a little bit of what I think it could look like. So maybe for this take back model, where we actually want to take the product back, we're not going to do any remanufacturing to it, and we do want to resell it. The first thing we want to do is actually cut market demand, that category, so that we're only looking at things that are 3s and 4s. So I actually don't care about, low market demand products at all for a model like this. Instead of weighting it, which is sort of arbitrarily assigned, we think like just cutting it by that data and having it re-ranked is still interesting. Maybe then the next thing you look at in a take back program, if you want to focus on hyper local reuse, is average population. So you actually find that top product has an average population of 1. We're selling, a really high priced product to a very specific customer, likely. So maybe actually, even though it does have a high market demand, it's not actually a good option for something that is hyper local. So that's one example. I think the next example is a little bit different. Let's say you're going to do sort of a subscription model, where instead of buying a product or even leasing a product, you like buy into the ability to get a product on demand, but also to give that product back if you don't want it anymore. So maybe we're actually looking at things that are going to last a long time and that can go through multiple reuse cycles, not just one. And also something that used inventory is actually quite large. Sometimes that can actually indicate that people have more than they want. So maybe they have, too much inventory on their hands. I think that's what Rheaply deals with sometimes on their platform. And that could be a good case for us to actually have a program where they can send it back and get the thing that they actually need.
I love all of this. It's making me giddy, actually, because this is kind of like the manifestation and a template of like the intro slide that we had of going from linear to circular, but that can feel so theoretical, but this is very practical. You can apply this kind of system, and it's really just about getting data in, analyzing in some consistent way, and then I really love the mapping and weighting based on the model that you're considering and relevant to your business. And so thank you both for sharing. So let's move on to what were the major lessons that you guys learned through this process? What were surprising? What was interesting? What are you walking away with?
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest challenges that we had from the get-go was just sales data. We actually only looked at 3 years of sales data, and that's primarily because we think, based on our understanding of the market, AV generally has about a 5-year cycle for our top customers who always want the latest and greatest upgrades. So the last 3 years is like products that are probably approaching what might be an opportunity to fit them into a secondary reuse while they're still at like a pretty decent quality for a second reuse. Even just looking at three years of data and doing what Valentina described, cutting the smaller products off. It was a astronomical level of data. We had to use separate Excels in order to properly look at the data because it was simply too large in some capacities. And so we recommend trimming it down in an organized fashion, but also involving sales professionals who work with this data all the time to make sure the right tags are associated. A lot of times, at least for us internally, we'll use, code names for different companies rather than their actual name. We'll also use code names for the products. So maybe like the SKU number instead of the actual, like, what does that even mean? So it took us a while to make the sales data usable. And by involving salespeople up front, that's probably the easiest way to jumpstart a project like this.
Yeah, and I'll add on that I think, oh, is my audio strange? Or does it
No.
sound good? Sounds good? Okay. I think the headphones are a little funky, so I'm hearing it weird. Okay, but good to hear you're not.
A better audio visual product.
Yeah, if you have any used gear, Jaden, I'd love to get some. But yeah, I think one thing that we've learned throughout the process as well, when we had a few iterations, was just it's a simple one, but really starting simple. Like, don't get crazy. I think it's easy to get really excited to look at so many different criteria because you're like, well, these are all really interesting and they do have an impact on the reuse of products, so we should consider them. But I do think there's a lot of value in being kind of clear and controlled on your boundaries for the project, having a very focused scope, And starting with less, you can always add more metrics in and then reassess, as Jaden showed, where you remove or change data and then see how the ranking changes. But one example that I thought was really funny for us was we wanted to look at where the most sales were going to, and we also wanted to look at the population. And then so instead of just taking the population of those regions where we sell the most products to, we're like, well, what if we can normalize the population by the sales data, and then that has more value. And we just complicated it to this level where months later, weeks later, we're like, okay, maybe we should just go back to population, because we have to share this with other teams. We have to kind of get buy-in from groups across the business to show why this is valuable and why we should consider the results that come out of this analysis for a business case study. And if that's too complicated for others to follow, if we're even struggling to remember how we develop certain things, then it's not going to be digestible for the audience that's going to like buy in and support and sponsor an initiative like this. So I think a lot of folks, like if you're joining from your organization and you're trying to look at how do I bring this to my organization, how do I potentially get support and buy-in from sponsors so that this could become a potential initiative, or at least we could pilot it and test what this would look like for our products, that I do think simplifying as much as possible will keep people interested throughout the process. And the last bit, I think Jaden really covered it very well in the last slide, but yeah, we didn't include a weighting criteria. I think if you go in with a really strong understanding of your goal, then and what you really want to take out of the results from this prioritization, then you could potentially apply that weighting criteria. But I do agree that I like our approach of weighting everything the same and then trimming the data. So just taking subsets of the data, looking at high ranking products for certain criteria, and then seeing how your rating changes. So who comes to the top when you trim the data, because then you're not actually changing it. You're just taking little bits of it and looking at it in unique ways. So that would be, another key takeaway. And then I think, the main purpose of today's session was really to hopefully bring something that was tangible, real. Like I really like what you mentioned earlier, Sabira, that the circular economy can be super theoretical. A lot of webinars can cover a high level of maybe an approach for this, but we wanted to actually really pull back the curtain, show the step-by-step process we took. Hopefully you could come out of this and actually like think about it for your businesses and be like, oh yeah, I could see how I would apply this to my own products. The hope is that this gives you a little jump start, but I'm sure there's still like a lot of questions that could be on your mind, and this still is, even with the content we're sharing here today, it can be a little overwhelming to initiate this process. So we wanted to leave you off with a few guidance points. If you are starting, we already mentioned earlier, keeping it simple, but try to like leverage this methodology at a high level and just look at all of your product lines, and using some of the criteria we mentioned around wear and tear and market demand, interest like that, using like your internal knowledge within your business, just do a quick scan and say, okay, based off of those criteria, we think that maybe this division is probably higher priority for us. Then from there, once you have a strong understanding of where you want to focus, then look at actually like modifying the criteria that we mentioned here so that it's criteria that's the most important for your business or your products, and then going into more of a detailed process of creating a scoring system. And then you really need to engage folks outside of sustainability. I will say that I'm assuming that a lot of people on the call are probably sitting within sustainability or tangential to sustainability, but it was huge to bring in sales. Of course, Jaden comes from a product engineering background, so I think that was an amazing plus, but also her connections throughout the company to understand the perspective of product engineers is huge. You really should keep those folks engaged throughout the process, throughout the analysis. So go back to them for feedback several times throughout this process. If they ask questions or really give feedback, like actually consider the feedback and build it in, because they are part of getting you support and sponsorship for making this something bigger. So I think that is really huge to make sure that other voices are considered in the entire process.
Amazing. So Jaden, based on these findings and learnings, how is Legrand gonna put this to work?
Yeah, it's very exciting. We're at the stage where we're taking this prioritization matrix and the different ways we're cutting it, and we're sort of flushing out certain business models. We'll evaluate that based on, some financial, some donation, things that are internal targets, and potentially look at piloting circular models based upon this prioritization matrix. If we do actually pilot, that's a great chance for us to actually validate the data, especially data that we created. For example, the wear and tear data. We have an assessment of how we think the product will look at the time of second life. But if we actually take back the products, that's another chance for us to actually assess physical products and see how well we predicted it. Maybe we entirely missed a question that massively impacts the way that wear and tear works for this particular product. If that's the case, it's a chance for us to go back and actually adapt the methodology that we created, maybe add that question, think about something new. And so I think this methodology is an initial step, but we're hoping if we pilot it, we can further iterate on it to make sure that it's useful and predicting what is interesting for Legrand.
Well, we made it, and I'm really, I'm at the edge of my seat to see how all of this goes. We can open it up for questions now, so feel free to use the Q&A feature. I didn't really see too many come in. I'll read whichever ones come in as they do. And of course, if you're feeling a little shy, as you can see, we're super excited and energized about these types of questions. So feel free also to reach out to Rheaply in the future, because we'd love to help you. And we would love also to learn more about your use case. Okay, so we have 1 or 2 questions coming in. Question for Jaden: since these business models are all based on the reuse of your own products, how did Legrand navigate the reuse cannibalizing the sales of new product?
That is a great question. And that was something that was brought up pretty constantly when we were taking different versions of this to especially the sales portion of our team. I think the best thing we did was in the market data creation. We actually targeted businesses that were not already in our customer database, and we did that specifically. We think that potentially companies that are interested in used products are a little bit smaller. Maybe they're also K through 12 universities, some other things that maybe are higher cost products are not typically being bought by them, but they would like to have access to that. So I think we targeted different businesses in that, and that helped the salespeople's questions. We also pitched it to them as if we only focus on customers that are not in our existing database, that's a customer acquisition possibility. So maybe they buy used products, but then if they really like our products, maybe they'll buy new products. That was something that we came up with as a way to sort of get around that cannibalizing the sales of new products question.
Yeah, I love that. I think I saw a Harvard business piece about how offering these types of programs actually enhances and increases brand loyalty for customers like that who might not be able to access for top tier products, and they're more likely to come back for a second or third transaction. So that's pretty spot on with what you're saying too, Jaden. That's cool. All right, we'll move on to the next question. Since you had product designers working with you on this project, were they surprised by anything? That's question 1. I'll wait before going to question 2.
Yeah, I think the surprising bit is actually some of the outcome. Like I mentioned, some of the products that came to the top were things I wasn't expecting, and that I think the product designers had not been thinking about at all, which is kind of the whole purpose of this. And so I think they're surprised by that, but it also sort of leads into the second half of the question as well.
So if you could use your data to change the way the products are designed, what would that look like?
Yeah, so for some of these products that we weren't thinking about, I think things like leasing models and subscription models or upgradability models are things that we've done a few of, but the data is indicating that are probably pretty interesting to customers and pretty interesting for the product category types. So I think this data helps indicate that there is a strong business case for designing products to be either compatible with the subscription model or compatible with an upgradable modularity model.
Love it. Thanks, Amy and Lauren, for those questions. Now we'll go to Yarden's question. Have you considering partnering with localized reuse organizations, sort of aggregators or redistributors? Curious what that could look like. or if Legrand sees that as viable, where a full take back program might not be as feasible. And then did you think about, or are you considering a recertifying process?
Yeah, I think for we talked a lot about warranty and recertification. I think for that, we'd have to be more involved than just facilitating like a business to business sale. So we would probably want to take it back, do some inspection on it before we would recertify it. That takes a little bit more effort. So that is not necessarily like our first thing that we're focusing on. Because I think that the reverse logistics become very complicated when you try to take products back, especially for us. Legrand is based on an acquisition model, which means we don't really have a centralized North American facility. It's sort of spread out by product type all across North America. So that makes it a little bit challenging for us, but is definitely a question that's come up, especially with UL, which is traditionally like a fire and safety rating for products that are in buildings themselves. In terms of partnering with localized reuse organizations, I think Rheaply is definitely one of them. In terms of like deconstruction or like local redistributors in that way, that's not something that we've looked at right now.
Yeah, and I'll just do a little plug for Rheaply there. So we offer software technology that helps organizations internally reuse and externally circulate surplus that they have or inventory that they want to manage. So we're able to connect businesses locally and even nationally to be able to maximize the life of whatever they've purchased as the first customer or second customer.
Just to add on a little bit there as well, I think the next stage, Jaden mentioned earlier, the next stage of this is taking the output and using that for business cases. And we are comparing like a business case that would be a more traditional take back, where there would be an opportunity to have a recertifying process versus going straight from one organization that's using it today to the next organization that's going to use it tomorrow, and potentially leveraging a technology platform like Rheaply to make that transfer of goods, and comparing what's like, oh, what are the downsides of going straight from one business to another, but also what are the upsides of not having to have that entire process built to recertify or to take back the reverse logistics. So that will be a kind of a phase 2 of what comes out of this work.
It kind of sounds like we previewed the answer to most of these questions, maybe, but if you are thinking about take back or recovery program, have you thought about like what the logistics or endpoints to get the product back are?
Yeah, we definitely have done some take back and recovery, but traditionally we've focused on smaller products because it is easier. There's a couple of different circumstances we've looked at. We sell a lot of products through distributors, not necessarily reuse distributors, but just distributors in general. AV, I think in particular, that's market sector often uses distributors as a sales path. That also means that they are the ones that are working with the contractors. That's kind of the node that is hard for us. We want to interface directly with the contractors when we're thinking about a product take back, especially if they're doing an upgrade of a space, right? If we're selling directly to a company, that's great. But if we're selling to a contractor that's bid on to a project through a distributor, we have to work with the distributor to take back that product, most likely. So that's one way of doing it. The other way is offering for those contractors to send it back to us, or companies to send it back to us. That tends to be less utilized because it just takes a lot more effort on their part.
Yeah, a lot of degrees removed from history and the birth of the product. Cool. I think there's one more question. Do you have any experience with circular models for poly blend fabrics, the high volume material in a line of business?
Do you think we have some products in the AV space that has, I'm not sure if it's polyblend, but we do have fabrics. We traditionally haven't looked at it. And actually one of the wear and tear questions was, does this product have fabric? Because it tends to have more visible cosmetic wear, even if it's not functional. But I definitely think like one of the advantages, if it's like not strapped to a rigid piece, which is usually what ours are in terms of like usually it's like a table or something like that has some form of like fabric top. or things like that. If it's just fabric itself, it's really foldable. It's much more transportable. When it's attached to furniture, like it is for our use case, it makes it pretty much only a hyper local option, since it is such a big product to send back to our facilities or to a new customer.
Yeah, from the Rheaply side of it, I think I really, to Jaden's point on hyper local, I think if there's opportunities to tap into hyper local reupholstery organizations that would be that like second step before it's going to the next user, that's an area that Rheaply's tapped into and like brought organizations like that onto our platform to try to hit on all the different steps that are needed to actually keep a product or material in use for long periods of time. So Lauren, if you ever want to chat, feel free to reach out. I think on the next slide, we have a link that you can go to if you wanted to schedule some time to speak. But if anyone on this call is like, we shared an overview what we did. We tried to put all of it kind of out there so that you can leverage it for yourselves. If it's still something that you're like, we just don't have the internal resources to do this. It seems really cool, but it's not something we can kind of lead ourselves. And we'd be interested in collaborating, then definitely feel free to reach out, schedule some time. We'll send this stuff out over email after this session, but it's really cool to just hear that people find this stuff useful. Like I get so excited when I see messages in the chat or in questions that are like, this is really helpful, this is amazing, because we want this to be leveraged across various industries.
Yeah, agreed. And actually, Valentina didn't mention one thing. Some of the projects that we do is work with manufacturers on even like the end of life opportunities for specific materials. So if that's something that you're thinking about with poly blends, then we can also work with you on projects like that to bring the material to a potential next use. Well, thanks, Jaden and Valentina, for leading us through this wonderful journey that was thorough and analytical, but also super clear to follow. And thank you, everybody who joined. We hope you found this useful. We're excited to stay connected. So please click the link that Jen sent to talk directly with Valentina. She's such a star. I love working with her. And if not, we'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.